James once signed deals worth billions of dollars, but when his 10-year-old daughter stood frozen in her bridesmaid dress just a few steps from the aisle, all his power became useless. Chloe couldn't move forward, not because she was tired, but because she was terrified by the crowd, by their stares, and because her mother was no longer there. Then, in the moment, James feared he had lost his daughter forever. A stranger's hand reached out, not a doctor's, not a relative's. You would never guess who saved her, or why. Stay with us, because this is more than just a touching story, it is a redemption. The antique clock in the plaza's grand hall chimed softly. Inside the venue, everything was perfect. Satin-covered chairs stood in straight rows, white roses lined the aisle, and candles nestled in crystal lanterns reflected shimmering patterns on the high ceiling. The master of ceremonies smiled, his gaze fixed on the end of the aisle where the little bridesmaid should have appeared. But no one saw Chloe. Not a single tiny footstep, not the rustle of silk, no sound to signal her approach. Only an ever-lengthening wait, and a growing hush weaving through the hall. Behind the waiting room door, Chloe stood with her back against the wall, eyes wide with panic. She pressed her lips together, her cheeks flushed as she fought to hold back tears. The once exhilarating bridesmaid dress that had thrilled her weeks ago now felt alien. Her small hand gripped the bouquet so tightly her fingers turned ghostly white. James stood before her, unable to move closer. Ceremony protocol held him back. The eyes of hundreds of guests pinned him in place, and an overwhelming helplessness swelled in his chest. As the wedding host for his sister, he ought to remain calm. Yet at that moment, all he could think about was his daughter trapped in her own fear. Chloe had once been a vivacious child, but since Elena's passing, she had withdrawn. No more running, no more joyful laughter. Everything inside her had stilled like an unfinished melody. James knew his daughter had not yet healed from her mother's death. No number of doctors, no series of therapy sessions could reach the darkness she carried within. And now, that look of a child desperate to escape the world pierced his heart. James clenched his fist. He could not step onto the stage, could not interrupt the wedding. But how could he sit there while his daughter was too frightened to take a single step? The music continued to play. The bride was about to appear. Guests exchanged curious glances. James turned once more toward the waiting room, hoping for a miracle, a small wonder, or anyone who could go to Chloe and bring her back into the world. Might it be that what his daughter needed lay outside the realm of power he knew so well?
Welcome to 30 Millionaire Stories, where success meets solitude, and every story heals a hidden wound. Subscribe and discover the heart behind the fortune.
In the fragile silence between hope and disappointment, as every gaze gradually turned toward the door that remained closed, a small movement occurred. No one noticed. No sound gave it away. Just a shadow gliding softly down the corridor. Soft-soled shoes making no noise. Golden hair tied high, swaying gently behind her. She wore no flower wreath, carried no clipboard or headset like the coordinators. She wore a simple service uniform, its cream-white collar speckled with pastry flour, and her eyes, those eyes were as gentle as early autumn sunlight streaming through the plaza's glass windows. Hannah, a name not on any guest list, certainly not someone anyone would remember after the reception. Yet in that moment, when everything seemed about to slip beyond control, she was the only person not checking her watch, not asking, "What's wrong?" but simply walking straight to the child who stood alone. Chloe still stood there, back against the wall, her tiny shoulders trembling as if battling an invisible storm. Tears glistened in her eyes, her gaze distant, not from a lack of courage, but because she was wrestling with something deeper, a memory, an emptiness, a loss that had never been named. The small bouquet in her hand was slick with sweat, Its blossoms drooped as if sharing her burden. Without a word of questioning and without waiting for permission, Hannah knelt slowly in front of Chloe, not to frighten her, not to rescue her, but as if she were becoming part of that trembling world. They were only inches apart. Hannah did not reach out immediately. She simply placed her hand on the floor at Chloe's level, then looked straight into those fleeing eyes. No one clearly heard what Hannah said. Perhaps she told a story. Perhaps she spoke of a memory. Once, she too had stood before a crowd. Once had wanted to turn and run. Once had thought herself not strong enough. Her voice was neither loud nor clear, but her tone carried the breath of truth, sincere enough to pierce the hardened shell of a child curled up in fear. James watched it all from just a few steps away. He could not hear the words, but every small gesture from Hannah touched him in a strange way. No technique, no rehearsal, no training manual. Just a stranger bowing before a child with all the patience and respect usually reserved for adults. Then, something almost impossible happened. Chloe moved. Not with a startled jolt, not in rebellion, just a small hand reaching out slowly, trembling but purposeful to grasp Hannah's tang. As if, after years of being lost, she had found a familiar signal. Hannah smiled. She said nothing more. She rose, still holding that hand, and began to walk. The door swung open. Inside, the music was transitioning between two parts of the ceremony. The entire hall turned back. And they saw not Chloe in her dazzling pink dress, but a little girl walking forward, eyes still reddened, hands still gripping that unfamiliar server. Yet each step she took was a victory won, a fear laid down, a miracle unannounced. James stood frozen. His heart tightened with each beat, not from pride, but from an emotion beyond words. He looked at Chloe, then at the stranger, leading his daughter by the hand. Part of him wanted to step forward. Another part knew that any intervention now would shatter the moment. In the splendid hall, as crystal lights danced across the wooden floor, Chloe and Hannah became two solitary rhythms merging into the flow of the ceremony. When they reached the center of the aisle, Hannah paused. She bowed her head and gently released Chloe's hand, neither forcing nor withdrawing hastily. She stood there like a rest in a musical score, yielding the crescendo to the one who should take the next step. Chloe did not look back. She stood tall, clutching her bouquet as if infused with new strength. Then she stepped on alone. In that instant, the world held its breath. No one knew Hannah's name. No one heard her words, but everyone knew they had just witnessed something far more meaningful than today's wedding. Have you ever wondered whether, at our weakest moment, what we need might come from a complete stranger? Dear audience, feel free to take a moment to relax or sip some water before we continue. More surprises await. Comment 1 if you enjoyed the story, so we know you're still with us. There are people who appear in our lives like a fleeting moment. But there are others who, though they step in only briefly, leave an echo like a piece of music that cannot be paused midway. James was not accustomed to paying attention to strangers. His world was programmed by logic, planning, and precision down to the minute. Every person was data. Every choice carried a percentage of probability. Yet for the first time in years, someone not on his schedule consumed his thoughts. Hannah, the server with gentle eyes and the way she held his daughter's hand as if they had known each other in a past life. After the ceremony, when guests one by one left the hall, leaving only the clink of dishes and the tired laughter of the service team, James did not leave. He stood and looked toward the corner of the room where Hannah was folding table linens and stacking chairs, as though that work too demanded dignity, even after the party had ended. He stepped forward, not with the coldness of a CEO, but with an unfamiliar hesitation. His initial thank you was brief and proper, as always, but his gaze did not waver. It followed each of her movements, gentle, orderly, without a hint of showmanship, as if the chaos around her could not touch her. Their conversation began with a few simple questions, then grew longer, and finally became a listening session. James had never expected to sit in silence so long, simply to hear about things he thought had nothing to do with him. Hannah had once been a piano prodigy. At 8, she performed a solo with the local symphony. At 12, she was awarded a special scholarship to Juilliard. In those years, every piece she touched bore an uncanny refinement, as if the music flowed from her fingers by right, long before she'd learned to write a note. But that dream, like every beautiful melody, was cut short prematurely. When Hannah turned 17, her younger brother Caleb was diagnosed with a severe congenital heart condition. Their parents lacked sufficient insurance, and hospital bills stretched into an endless burden. So Hannah, instead of continuing her studies, chose to return home, putting down the hands once lauded as an extension of a Steinway to become the family's sole financial pillar. She waited tables in the morning, gave piano lessons to neighborhood children in the afternoon, and donned her hotel uniform at night. Day in, day out. No stage lights, no audience, no applause. Only the old piano she'd carried when she left school, its kludgy notes echoing after the city had gone to sleep. James did not ask why she hadn't sought sponsorship, nor did he reproach her for abandoning her dream so soon. Because in every story she told, there was not a single complaint, no trace of bitterness, only the simple, unadorned truth that love sometimes does not require performance. It requires presence. And she had chosen to be present for her brother. The words that rendered James speechless came when Hannah smiled and softly said, "Even if I play only one note each day, I am still an artist." She did not need the spotlight. She did not need recognition. She only needed to believe that she had not forsaken what made her feel truly alive. For James, who measured worth by stocks, success by analytics, what Hannah shared was another world entirely, a place where loyalty did not reside in contracts but in silent decisions, a place where sacrifice was not tallied in figures but in the time lost and the music never played. He looked at her, a woman who once had everything, now living in quiet obscurity, yet it was she who brought his daughter back into the light after years of hiding. That paradox made James feel small, not because he was defeated, but because he could not fathom what compelled someone to give so much and still maintain such serenity in her eyes. Hannah was just a server, but on that day she was the conductor of a symphony without a stage or instruments, only an outstretched hand and a heart that demanded no reward. How many brilliant dreams now live quietly among us, and who among them will change your life without you ever knowing? Not all miracles arrive in an instant. Some wonders begin with small, repeated gestures like fingertips tapping on wood quietly, steadily, unnoticed, until they become music. After the wedding, James said nothing more about Hannah. He asked no further questions, offered no gestures beyond polite courtesy. But the next morning, when Chloe woke and sat unmoving by the breakfast room window, her gaze more distant than usual, the first words she spoke were, "I want to see her." There was no need to specify whom. James understood, and he knew this was not a whimsical request. Hannah showed no surprise when the hotel manager's call came, relaying Mr. Whitaker's invitation that she could stop by his home if she had time. But when she stepped into that space, a penthouse overlooking Central Park with flawless, cool-toned interiors, she realized at once there was nothing here for a child. No trace of scribbled drawings, no clatter of toys, only an oppressive silence and a little girl searching for room to breathe in her own soul. Chloe approached when she spotted Hannah, neither running nor squealing with delight. She walked softly, as if over thin ice. In her hand was a folded piece of paper inside, the simple children's melody that Hannah had sung at the wedding. No one had taught Chloe how to bond with another person, yet somehow her heart had chosen exactly the right person to unlock itself. From that day on, Hannah began dropping by in the afternoons several times a week. No schedule, no commitment, no titles. Just afternoons at the piano in the reading room where no melody had sounded since Elena's passing. Chloe sat at the keys, her small hands stiff from lack of practice, but her eyes shone with longing. Hannah did not follow any curriculum. She began with rhythms. Her fingers tapped lightly on the piano's wood surface, silent movements rather than notes. Chloe followed. Then came single tones. Then basic chords. Each step was a tiny victory, not for the sake of technique, but for the gift of presence. James watched from afar. He did not intrude. He merely passed by the doorframe, listening to those nascent notes echo like the first drops of water in an empty vessel. The house began to have sound. Not much, not full, but enough to overpower the 2 years of silence. Once, he found Hannah dozing on the wooden staircase after nearly 2 hours of playing with Chloe. She still wore her heavy coat, head resting against her backpack, hair tousled. In that moment, James realized she did not belong to the world of contracts, but to the world of simple yet indispensable things. Chloe progressed rapidly not because she was a prodigy, but because she felt safe. With each piece, she learned not only how to play, but how to be present, to tap in time, to listen, to pause, to continue. Principles that apply not just to music, but to a life lived fully. And Hannah, with her ever-patient eyes, was the only one who could keep Chloe seated, gently coaxing her to endure her own imperfect beginnings. Neither of them named this bond. Yet it existed like an invisible duet. James began to question himself. Since when had he decided that every connection must originate from complexity? How long had it been since he saw his daughter as a child learning to live instead of a project in need of improvement? Of all the experts he'd hired, none had made Chloe smile so softly when she hit a wrong note. That unnamed, unbound connection was so evident it compelled even an outsider to believe. Sometimes what children need is not to be fixed, but someone patient to sit beside them as they learn to err and to learn to love imperfection. Will James be willing to change something to hold on to the person who illuminated the home not with lamps, but with music and genuine kindness? Dear viewers, stay tuned for the next part that will leave you in awe. Take a moment to like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always thrilling to see people joining us from around the world. Not all first pieces are perfect, yet sometimes it's the hesitation of a wrong note that makes our hearts tremble the most. One Saturday afternoon, in their familiar black SUV, James and Chloe drove to a small wedding on Long Island. It was the nuptials of a close friend in the finance world, every detail polished, every moment by the book, from the speeches to the carefully selected background music. Chloe had been invited along, not as a bridesmaid, but simply as a guest. Yet, when she accepted, she carried with her something no one else knew. A short musical score folded neatly in the pocket of her dress. Hannah was not with them. She was at the hospital, tending to Caleb after a round of treatment. But before Chloe left home, Hannah had given a soft nod when the little girl asked, "If I wanted to play just a little piece, do you think I could?" At the reception, warm lights spilled over tables draped in white linen, and the clink of crystal glasses filled the festive air. Chloe sat quietly beside James, her eyes sweeping toward the light ensemble tucked in the corner. No one paid her any mind, and no one expected anything. Yet from the very first moment, James's gaze never left his daughter. Then, in an unannounced instant, Chloe stood. Her small hand gripped the folded score, She walked toward the grand piano on the little stage. No one stopped her. No one understood what was happening. The event coordinator glanced at James, but he gave no signal. He simply stood, stunned. Chloe climbed onto the piano bench. Her feet hovered above the floor, suspended like a precarious breath. She opened the lid, straightened the sheet music, and placed her hands on the keys. No introduction, no spotlight, just a little girl playing a simple melody. Her fingers were awkward, the opening notes trembled, yet each tone rang out in the hall like a single drop of water in silence. First came curiosity, then stillness, then a hush spreading like a chain reaction. No one knew why they were holding their breath. Perhaps because of Chloe's fragile posture. Perhaps because the melody was so simple that it touched something pure in every adult who had long forgotten their own gentleness. James felt his throat tighten. He looked at his daughter, as though seeing her for the very first time. Not as someone to protect, but as a soul blossoming, daring for the first time to touch the world with her own voice, through the piano keys. The piece ended without fanfare. Chloe did not bow. She simply closed the score, folded it away, and stepped down as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. But for James, and surely for all who bore witness, what had just transpired was anything but small. When Chloe returned to the table, she said nothing. She handed the wernaged paper to James. He unfolded it. Below the music, scribbled in childish print, was a single line, "Thank you, Miss Hannah." And in the corner, a small drawing of two hands clasped together. James held that paper for a long time. He could not recall ever holding any document so tenderly, not even the largest contracts of his career. In his heart, something cracked open. Not because of the music, but because of the gratitude it expressed. Chloe had come to care for someone so deeply that she chose to say thank you, not in words, but in music. That night, after the reception ended and their car headed back to Manhattan, James did not rush home. He stopped by the hospital where Hannah was asleep in the waiting area, a thin blanket draped over her shoulders. He did not wake her. He only placed the folded score on the table beside her, along with a brief handwritten note. "She has said for me what I have never dared to say." Then he left without a word. Sometimes, we need not speak to show our thanks. We only need the right sound at the right time and someone brave enough to touch our fears with hands that do not tremble. But there is one thing James does not yet know. Hannah once had a past stolen from her, a musical opportunity that never came to fruition. And that truth is about to make everything he has witnessed far greater than ever before. Have you ever wondered if someone is holding within them a symphony that has never been played, just waiting for the right person to listen? Not all dreams die when we let go. Some dreams are merely waiting for someone to awaken them at the right moment, for the right person, and with the very first note. James sat in his office on the 58th floor of the Midtown Financial Tower, city lights blurring through the thick glass. Before him lay a dossier, not a merger contract or profit report as usual, but an internal investigation he himself had commissioned, bearing only one name, Hannah Bennett. In researching ways to help her cover Caleb's hospital bills, James stumbled upon an overlooked detail. When Hannah was 18, a record label had signed her a contract promising a nationwide debut. Yet, just months later, that company vanished from the market. Not bankrupt, not sued, simply gone, taking with it the first recording Hannah had ever completed. No copies remained, no copyrights, no chance for re-release. Someone like Hannah, without legal representation or influence, could only silently accept it and carry on as if that dream never existed. James read the final line in the file. Subject declined to pursue legal action. He closed his eyes. Part of him was baffled. Another part understood more keenly than ever. Sometimes we abandon not out of weakness, but because we no longer have time to fight. That evening, James went to the hospital. Hannah was still caring for Caleb, the bright-eyed boy, as frail as a tiny flute. James said little. He simply handed Hannah an envelope. Inside was an offer, not a legal document, no strings attached but an invitation to perform at his company's charity concert at Carnegie Hall. Hannah opened the letter, eyes fixed on the words, "Let that dream be heard again. This time, no one will steal it from you." She did not answer immediately. Yet James knew that true dreams need not shout to be heard. On the night of the concert, New York shimmered under late-season snow. Carnegie Hall was no stranger to the elite, but that evening the auditorium felt different. It wasn't the elegant attire or famed orchestra, it was the unfamiliar name placed last on the program, Hannah Bennett, special piano dedication. James sat center row, Chloe beside him in a simple white dress, gaze never leaving the stage. When Hannah appeared, there was no raucous applause, no cheers, only gentle clapping, enough to let her know they were ready to listen. She wore no evening gown, only a long black dress to her ankles, hair in a neat bun, eyes serene. In that simplicity, the Steinway at center stage became an extension of her being, as if the music to come was born not from keys but from her own life. The first piece Hannah played was the one once stolen. No one had ever heard it, no recording existed, yet as the opening notes sounded, hearts throughout the hall seemed to stop. The music wasn't showy, nor a display of virtuosity. It carried regret, compassion, and a strength only found in someone who has lost something and yet dares to stand and play again as if never broken. Chloe gripped James's hand as the climax swelled. He felt her tremble not from fear but from deep emotion. James looked toward the stage. In that instant, he no longer saw a server or the weary woman he once glimpsed sleeping at the hospital. He saw an artist, a woman carrying forgotten memories and brave enough to transform them into sound that reached the softest corners of the human heart. At the end, Hannah did not rise for a bow. She simply placed her hand over her heart and closed her eyes, a gesture not for the crowd, but for herself, as though returning to her own soul what had long been missing. That night, the press said little of her. No viral hashtags trended. But James knew, what truly moves others need not be inflated. It only needs to live at the right moment. Chloe began practicing that piece at home. Every day. She memorized it not because she was forced to, but because she held each note in her mind as one would remember the name of a friend. And James, the man who once used his wealth to build stages for others, felt smaller than ever before in the presence of someone who needed nothing more than a piano and the hush of an empty concert hall. When everything had finally quieted, James entered the living room where Hannah was quietly gathering the scattered sheets of music at the foot of the piano. He said nothing. He simply stood there, took her hand the same way Chloe once had, and understood that this time it was his turn not to let go. Do you believe that dreams you thought were lost can be heard again, if only someone quietly believes in them? Perhaps the greatest beauty in life is not measured by how much money we have or how much fame we achieve, but by having the courage to step out of our own fear and the compassion to help others find the light they've lost. Chloe conquered her first panic attack through music. Hannah, with a dream once stolen, rose up and turned that wound into a gift that healed an entire family. And James, who believed everything could be controlled by reason, learned for the very first time how to listen to his own heart. If you carry an unfinished dream, or if you're quietly persevering for someone else, this story is for you. Share your feelings in the comments below. We read every one each night. If you see yourself in this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your loved ones in the United States, spreading the healing power even further. Thank you for staying with us until the end. And remember, sometimes a small piece of music can change an entire life.